Yeah, one, I think it's the direction the city needs to go. I think it's more defined. I think it's what more people want, stay at, with a historical Oakdale. I think we need to slow down and get the architect in. I think that'd be the direction to go. So he tells us exactly what we need to do while we're down there. And I know we got Mary working on the documentation end of it. And my question would be, if we get the architect in and he tells us what we can and can't do on all the buildings and all that stuff, and you're handling the documentation part of it, is there anything else that's going to be left to do, like another plan or something of Oakdale or whatever?
Mary, would you like to speak to that, or?
Sure. You can do a more in-depth, it's called a Historic Structures Report and Preservation Plan, which Paul Pettigo and I did for Barnard's Mill. But what the Texas Historical Commission is recommending right now is not to go quite to that in-depth and just do a schedule of preservation and maintenance. And I think that's great, hand in hand with the National Register nomination. What you run, and this was in the material I gave to Karen today, what you run the risk of by working on the buildings before it's listed in the National Register without the help of a preservation architect or without knowing the history of the buildings, you can be removing architectural and historic significance and endanger being in the register. So I think what the commission is proposing, both the Texas Historical Commission and your City Historic Preservation Commission, is a very feasible, workable plan. So you'll end up with the National Register nomination, which is documents the history of the park. It talks about its historical significance and architectural significance. And then you'll have the recommendations of the architect of rehabilitation things to do in the order in which to do them correctly. So does that answer your question?
What's sort of the length of time that it takes to do a study like that?
Well, the National Register nomination is due in September of 2011. So it's probably will take me about a year to do all the documentation that's necessary. What the architect will do for you will not take that long. So you can actually have his recommendations first before the National Register nomination is complete.
If we're doing work with his recommendations, does that affect the registry? Or?
It shouldn't. If he's a good qualified historic preservation architect who follows the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation, it should not affect eligibility.
One of my main concerns is a pool, because we have we're looking for a grant to rework that pool, which is going to be probably, if we get it, we'll be in August sometime, which we have not even worked.
This August?
Yeah.
Then you probably need to get an architect in here pretty quick.
So basically,
To get that
he says,
done.
okay, we can do this and this and this pool, and we can go ahead with the grant. Because the grant does include adding some deck surfaces and stuff like that, but the pool itself needs repair, which we wouldn't do until the fall.
Okay. Yeah, I think the architect, if you hired one now, could probably get, focus on the goal first. Yeah. And I can, and if the pool is a high priority, I can focus my research on the pool, so when the architect comes in, I can tell the architect the history of the pool, which I think a lot of you know anyway. I know a little bit of it, and what's significant, what I think is significant about the pool. So we can work together to achieve the goals.
When we're talking about refurbishing or rehabilitating these cabins, how much of focus or is the interior set on that?
Not usually. It's not usually a concern. The historic, the National Register and most city commissions do what's visible from the public right away. They focus on the exterior.
Right.
But the National Register does look at significant interior features. So if they have original hardwood floors, original interior woodwork, they'll want you to. So the answer to your question is, it depends on how much of the original interior features are there.
If we can obviously determine that the interiors are not historical, they've been replaced, if we can provide that opinion for ourselves, would it be okay to go ahead and move forward to get those, I guess, rehabilitated? And I think
I
there's only-
wouldn't until the architect takes a look
Right,
at it.
okay.
Because that's the point, what you and I view as not significant is not what a historian would see.
I would get me
That's
and the
the point.
architect in there together, and if it's me and Paul, we can go through them.
Because some of those buildings were not actually livable, so there would have to be something done,
Mhm.
you know,
Oh,
we have
sure.
to determine what.
But you just have to be really careful about removing historic materials. Because what the National Register nomination is going to do for you is it's going to make you eligible for bricks and mortar grants that you can get to restore those cabins.
So in the meantime, while we're waiting, in the waiting process and upgrading the plumbing or electrical, shouldn't be an issue of any kind, would it?
Well, I'd wait for the architect to look at it. I focus, as Adams recommended in his letter, focus on the new area that's not going to, if you read his letter, he says that he really highly recommends focusing on the new property that won't impact the historic integrity.